I was trying to think of a real life example. Um, and sometimes you come up with an answer, and when you're younger or you're naive or you don't have good omnidirectional antennas, you come up with what you think is a brilliant answer, and it turns out to be not exactly what they wanted. Years ago, there was a conglomerate here in Chicago called Northwest Industries, and it was a spin-off or an outgrowth from the old Northwest Railway Company. And they were acquiring companies in consumer products. I think Haynes was part of it and a few others. So they hired my firm, Crescent, McCormick, and Paget, to do a study of home sewing. And this goes back quite a few years. The reason they wanted the study done was that there came on the market, the company, Simplicity Pattern was up for sale along with Singer Sewing Machine, and the guy who was in charge of strategic planning said, I can do a twofer and be a real hero in the company here and sweep the market. And the market had been growing like this. So they hired us to do this study. We went to the trades, fabrics, sewing machine people, retailers, and talked with all of them. And they all said it's going like this, and it's going to continue to go like this. And the people who are sewing, that demographic is growing, and it's usually poor people who don't have any other way to provide clothing. You can see that there's a lot of those out there. So I said, okay, that's interesting. And then we did some correlations with other population groups. And we found an almost perfect correlation between home sewing sales and educated women between the ages of 30 and 45, somewhere in there. I said, that's really strange. And so we began looking into it, and then the more we found out about it, the more it made sense. And that is that young, educated mothers want clothing for their kids. Perhaps at that time, of course, our rules were much more well-defined, so women stayed home and men worked, and so maybe the husband hasn't quite made enough money yet to go to Neiman's, which is the aspiration, of course. And it takes a certain amount of skills to sew. It's like men in their wood shops. I mean, the people without skills don't have fingers. Well, it takes skills to do this, and it also takes money and space because you have to have a room for it and so on. And what we saw then was the demographics were going right off a cliff. That cohort of the population was going to come to an end in a hurry. So we went back to them and said, well, here's the story. If you buy this thing, you're never going to reach your targets for growth and profitability in this industry. And our recommendation is you don't do it. Okay. End of story. Went away. 2 or 3 years later, I called on this gentleman one more time, and he says, Metzler, come on in here. I said, great. You know, I thought he'd be all over me, patting me on the back. And he said, I want you to know that that study was brilliant. I want you to know that if we had done those acquisitions, it would have been a disaster, and I want you to know that I would have been fired as a result of that. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get some more work. And he says, you know what, but I hate you for it, because you made me look like a fool in front of the boss. And he had a different expectation. He probably would have done 2 acquisitions, become a hero, and maybe flipped out of that company and gone on to a bigger and better job someplace before the chickens came home to roost. So here's a situation where being brilliant and coming in with an answer, and in my naivete, because I was a younger guy at that time, I didn't sense where he was in the corporate situation, and I gave him the right answer, but I gave him the wrong answer for him personally. I don't know where he is today. And Northwest Industry, of course, has just sold off all the businesses over time. So I guess the moral of the story is you can get surprised, can't you?
Yeah. Okay, Joyce, I have a question for you. From your unique vantage point, what does the consultant need to learn about the organization in order to make a better sale and in order to do a better job when they're actually contracted?
Well, my expectation when I work with people is that they have done their homework. You know, they've gone out to the website, they've learned about the business that you're in, and so that when there's a conversation about the project and what you're working on, as the discussion is going on, there's some give and take, and you're getting comfortable that the person knows about the business itself. So I would imagine that you all do that. You go out and look at the website, and if you could talk to somebody who works at the firm themselves before you go and find out if they have any tidbits or information that isn't available on the website, that always helps. If they know about then something about the assignment and they can demonstrate examples, specific examples where they've been successful in the past so they can apply what they've done before to your situation, that's always helpful. But knowing just the right amount of information to provide, because if you talk too much, then you're losing. So you need to be able to read your audience and get a sense for where they are. And if there's, you know, head nodding, then you know to be quiet. And if there's puzzlement, then you know to talk a little bit more. And if there's disinterest, then you know you have to change your tactic.
Okay, good. Does anyone else want to add to that from your perspective? Okay. All right. Noel, question for you. In this sort of intermediary role that you play, finding a fit between executives and companies, what issues or what reservations do you find that employers have in general about this sort of temporary executive arrangement?
It's new to the industry, and people in the hiring seat, I don't necessarily know that they have a reservation once they get into it, but initially what I'm finding is that they're not used to the level of talent coming in on a contract basis. They think of contractor as 25-year-old that's out of work and to come and grind out numbers all day versus somebody who has had their job at a very similar company before, and the hiring manager can't even fathom a career not working for the organization and being there for 18 years and making their career, so they can't fathom bringing in somebody at this level and why they want to be there and why they've made a career out of it. And in the past, that was the case. I interviewed a quote-unquote consultant who the largest organization this gentleman had ever worked for in a direct hire role. He was the CFO of a $26 million company. And I said, where have you consulted before? He said, oh, I consulted at BP, and I consulted at Navistar, and I consulted, and he went through this list of places that he's been a consultant to that he never should have consulted to. He doesn't understand those organizations, those cultures. So that organization is not used to, BP is not used to having somebody that used to work for Motorola coming and working for them. It's not something that companies are used to, and it's getting more and more in vogue today, but it's oftentimes the first time that the hiring manager's seen a resume like that.
Okay. I guess this is for all of you from each of your backgrounds. When we think about someone coming in as a consultant, today, because of the economy, there are a lot of executives who have been downsized, who've been laid off, and they become consultants either as a temporary phenomenon while they're looking for work or as their next true step in their careers. How often have you worked with someone who is a brand new consultant as opposed to, they've spent their career in a company, or is that an option for you, or do you insist that they have already worked for years as a consultant first? Sure.
So we're new to the market, so I've interviewed a little more than 190 people since Thanksgiving. And the hardest part about my job is really pounding the point with the potential consultant to find out if they're ready to do this. You can't consult. You're not a consultant if you're out of work and you're interviewing for other jobs because you can't get your arms around that this is a real job. This is a career path. And I met a woman the other day, one of the most brilliant people that I interviewed the entire process, and she's out of work and she's looking for something, and man, she would impress any one of my clients that I put her in front of, but she's laser focused on becoming the CFO of an organization, and it's not going to happen through me. So I can't work with her. I need to find somebody who is mentally there. Now, first time, getting back to the question, first time, I will work with somebody who wants to give this consulting thing a try. I am happy to do that, but they have to truly be committed to, I want to try consulting. I want to see what the lifestyle is like. And at the end of the 6 months or 9 months or whatever the assignment is, hopefully they want to do it again, but I need a commitment. I need to know with everything that goes into it that they are not interviewing for a job the whole time that they're out. Because when you get into the execu-temping world, if you have somebody for $25 an hour that's grinding out data and they don't show up to work on Monday, you could send somebody else in for $25 an hour to do that job and take over. If you're getting hired to lead the strategy of a major project and you're being paid $175 an hour for it and you leave 3 months into a 6-month assignment, nobody can just pick up and where you left off, and everyone has egg on their face and they're out tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars if it goes bad.
Bruce, did you want to comment on that?
Sure. I've used consultants from a newly unemployed CEO who did a phenomenal job for us to one of the big 4 consulting firms that was the worst experience I ever had with consultants because it had nobody with sector knowledge of my not-for-profit business. They just had, as Noel was saying, they had a methodology, and I went through all of the different steps, and at the end, had no end result. I was a lot smarter about consultant methodology, but I didn't end up with a project that returned something. So, and I've used newly minted consultants who didn't do a good job. I think it depends on the person and their level of understanding, and also I'm a lot smarter now about hiring consultants than I used to be. But I think it's a very individual thing, and I wouldn't hesitate to hire a newly minted consultant over somebody who was very experienced. Sometimes I feel like when I hire a very experienced consulting team that they have the square hole, and no matter what, doesn't matter what shape my peg is, it's going to fit in that hole, whether I like it or not. And not all of them. I don't want to paint anything with a broad brush, but I've had many discussions with people that said, I hear what you want, but you need this. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're right, but I don't necessarily want to hear it. But often they're not listening because they know how to do one thing and I need something else.
Right. So Bruce, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So those in the audience probably don't know this, but at one point, Bruce and I worked for the same organization that had its own internal consulting group. And that was actually how we met. And I worked on a consulting project for Bruce and his operation. And then that led to, it was a successful project. At the end of the project, Bruce had an exciting opportunity open up, and then he offered that position to me. So I wasn't moving from an independent consulting position into a corporation. I was already at the corporation. But it was an example where you consult for someone, you do a great job, you work together well, and that person hires you as a full-time employee. I'd be interested to know from each of you, and I know Richard, I'm sure throughout your career people have offered you, please come and work for us because we love the work you did. How do you handle this both on the receiving end and the giving end? Do you make these offers, and how does that transpire? So Richard, why don't you start us off?